Hi everyone, it's Kathy. Thank you so much for joining me. It's time for another collaboration with my friend Marla over at Mad About Cards and Crafts. And this month we decided to do an interactive card, which was perfect because I had these particular dies in my stash and I really wanted to use them. So the stamps that I'm using are the Critter Costume Party from Not Too Shabby, the Fall Gnomes from Not Too Shabby. I'll also be using the Grass and Cloud Edger die sets from Whimsy Stamps. And for the interactive part, I will be using the No-See Kinetic die set and the Kinetic Curved Basics die set. Here's a quick look of where we're going to be going with this card so you can see how the little bee flies across the front of the card. And I really struggled on what to share in this video because what I really want to focus on is how to use those kinetic dies. This is the first time that I had used them, and of course I had a design flaw or two, but I really wanted to share how I was able to work myself through my few design flaws that I had. The other thing, I really wanted to keep the ink blending in because I decided to use the new, well, they're new to me, Mini Catherine Pooler inks in the Spa Collection set, and I wanted to share how these blend differently than the Distress Oxide inks. So I decided to keep the ink blending in, and of course how to use the kinetic dies. I did leave the coloring out for two reasons. First reason is that I had colored the bee in my previous video using the Critter Costume Party. I'll make sure to link to that video at the end of this video. And for the pumpkins that I colored, I used the same colors of markers that I had used in a previous video as well. Of course, I'll have all of the products that I used as well as the Copic markers that I used listed in the description box below. Anywho, oh, and before I forget, because I'm trying to get this voiceover done fairly quickly because I got a job, but that's another story for another time. Marla's video will also be linked in the description box below. So let's now get back to this card of mine. For the ink blending, I started out with a piece of Neenah Classic Crest cardstock and I cut it to 4 by 5 1/4. I die cut a circle from masking paper so I could mask off that section for the moon. I started out with Daydream ink so that that could be the glow for my moon. The next color I used was Juniper Mist, and then I moved out to Royal Treatment, which is the purple color. And I love how deep and rich these colors are, and the inks do look a little bit blotchy when you first start working with them, but once they dry completely, they totally settle down and the blotchiness goes away. After I was done ink blending the background, I removed the mask for the moon, and then I used the negative of that mask so I could ink blend the moon, and for that I used Sauna ink. Once I had a layer of the Sauna ink down, I came in with my C3 and C1 Copic markers to add the craters into the moon. I thought about doing a gray ink, but I don't have any of the gray inks from Catherine Pooler, and the Catherine Pooler inks are water reactive, so I was a little leery of bringing water to the moon. I didn't want to end up with some weird blotches. So that's how I decided upon using the Copic markers instead. And for the craters, I didn't overthink it, just like in my previous video. I just scribbled it, and then I went over the C1 with my C0. Did I say C3? I think I used C3 and C1. I might have used C1 and C0. The correct markers will be listed below. Anyway, after I was done with the moon, I put the circle mask back over the moon, which it didn't want to stick down very well because it was still pretty saturated from all the ink blending. And then I just used the Dylusions white ink spray so I could add some stars to my night sky. I set that panel off to the side so that it had a chance to dry, and I started to do some die cutting for my bits and pieces that I was going to need for my interactive parts. This piece here that I'm die cutting from gray cardstock is going to be the pull tab. The smaller one that I'm die cutting from the black cardstock, that's going to be the piece where my little bee is attached to so that it can be a no-see moving part. And then I also die cut the circles from the same black cardstock. I also needed to have something to hide the track that I'm going to be die cutting from the ink blended panel. So I used the Grass and Cloud Edger die and cut it from a piece of black cardstock as well. After I had all of those little bits and pieces cut out, I set them aside, grabbed my ink blended panel, which is completely dry at this point, and decided which size track I needed to die cut. I thought at first I was going to use the longest one, and then I changed my mind because I was afraid it would be too long. So I decided to use the middle-sized die from the Kinetic Curved Basics die set. And this is where my first design flaw occurred. I had placed the die so far to the left because I wanted to have my bee stop kind of hanging over the pumpkins that I knew that I was going to be putting in on that right-hand side. So after I ran it through my die cut machine and started to put it together, I realized I have a little bit of a problem. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. After I ran that through my die cut machine, I grabbed one of the little black circles and I used a black foam square on top of that. Then I placed my ink blended panel on top of that with the little foam square inside that track. So that track is how the little bee is going to fly across the front of the card. And he's able to fly because of the gray pull tab. Now, I really like the design of this pull tab because it has those 4 circles, and that helps you decide how long you need your pull tab to be. I chose the second circle from the left because I wanted to have some of the pull tab hanging off on the right-hand side. I didn't want too much of it hanging off though, because I didn't want it hanging off the very end of the card. So had I used the first circle, it would have been sticking out too much. Had I used the third circle, it would have been too short. So after I had the pull tab placed on top of the foam dot, I added a little bit of liquid glue to the other black circle and adhered that on top of the foam dot. I wanted to add my sentiment to the pull tab, but I wanted to make sure that I had it lined up right, so I actually stamped the second word first, which is Halloween, and I used VersaFine Onyx black ink for that. Then I stamped the word Happy. And after I stamped the word Happy, I realized that I didn't have the pull tab pushed all the way back so that the little circles were at the bottom of the track on the left-hand side. So that was my second design flaw, and I had to figure a workaround for that. So what I did was I cut off the end of the pull tab on the left-hand side, making sure that I didn't get too close to that black circle. Then when I was testing it to make sure if it was moving right, you can see now that it's pushed all the way back, my pull tab is too far back. So to fix it, I scooched it over a little bit so the end of the pull tab would be hanging out on the right-hand side. I placed the piece that I had die cut with the grassy edger border on top to make sure that I had that placed correctly. Then I grabbed a piece of foam tape and used that as a stopper for my pull tab. And I had to make sure that the foam tape wasn't sticking up higher than the grassy edge panel, and it was, so I had to pull up the foam tape and scooch it down just a little bit, and then I tested it again to make sure that the little stopper really worked. The next thing that I did was I created a little collar for my pull tab. This is totally optional, it's just something that I like to do because it helps keep the pull tab straight when it's pulled out from the card, especially because I have a curved track for my little bee. The pull tab kept wanting to tilt up a little. So I took a little piece of regular printer paper and I cut it down, and then I folded it around the pull tab, but I made sure that it wasn't too tight around the pull tab. I still want the pull tab to move freely. I used my Zig 2-way glue pen to close up that collar. Then I applied more of the 2-way glue pen to the back side of that collar and slid it over the top of the pull tab. And the important thing here, obviously, is you actually want to glue that to the card panel, not the pull tab. So after I had pressed the collar into place, of course I had to pick up my little card panel and test the pull tab one more time to make sure that it was still moving smoothly. Since my pull tab was moving smoothly, the next thing I had to do was figure out how to work with my no-see element. So that is the black strip. I'm going to call that the no-see element. Basically what that piece does is it hides behind my little grassy hill that I had die cut, and then I'll attach the bee to the front of my no-see element, and it will appear that my little bee is just floating across the front of the card as I pull the pull tab. The no-see element has score lines in it when you run it through your die cut machine, so you can easily figure out how long it needs to be as it folds over the front landscape piece that's going to be hiding the track and the pull tab. I hope that makes sense. Hopefully by watching what I'm doing, it makes it a little bit more clear. Now the one thing that I did learn is that when folding on those score lines, you do want to have a flat top on the top of that no-see element. So you're going to actually want to fold on 2 of the score lines. And I did bring in my bone folder to make sure that I got those score lines burnished really well. It definitely seemed to help the no-see element hang straight down instead of kind of popping up from the front of the card. And the very nature of cardstock is it's going to naturally want to pop up because it's a more sturdy material. After I was done with the card, I did put an acrylic block on top of the little bee, and that helped flatten out that little no-see element so it didn't pop up away from the front of the card. Anyway, moving right along. After I figured out where I needed to fold my no-see element, and I burnished those score lines really well, I had to start adding in some foam tape behind my grassy hill. When adding foam tape on the panel that goes around the pull tab, you want to make sure that you don't get too close to the pull tab with the foam tape because it'll impede the movement of that pull tab. After I had the foam tape adhered, I grabbed my no-see element and added a little bit of liquid glue to the black circle that is on my pull tab and adhered my no-see element to that. And here you can see I'm putting my grass panel over the top to make sure that there's enough clearance. And the no-see element was a little bit long, so I trimmed off the bottom below the black circle. Now I am ready to put my little grassy hill in place, so I removed all the release paper from the foam tape and adhered my grassy hill. Then of course I had to test the pull tab one more time to make sure that it was going to continue to move smoothly. To attach my little bee, I used a little bit of liquid glue, and once I was happy with where he was at, I used my scissors to trim off the excess of my no-see element, which it's a good thing that I used liquid glue because really I should have trimmed that off before I adhered him down. But that is the beauty of liquid glue. You do have a little bit of wiggle time to fix something if you have to. As I was testing my pull tab, I noticed that something was getting stuck, and I also realized that I needed to have another piece of foam tape to stabilize the bottom half of my grassy hill. So I pulled off the grassy hill, I added more foam tape, and then I remembered that I was supposed to put a foam square on the black circle underneath my no-see element. I was able to pull off my no-see element and add that foam square and put my no-see element back down. And adding the extra foam tape did help stabilize my little grassy hill. And the foam square on the no-see element definitely helped my bee fly across the front of a card a lot more smoothly. The next step was to add a whole bunch of foam tape to the backside of my card panel. And you really don't want to skimp on the foam tape for this part. You do want to make sure that you have plenty of it on the backside. After I had the foam tape down, I did want to test my little pull tab one more time. And to make sure that it moved really smooth, I did use my anti-static powder bag and pounced it along the track. And that really helps the element move more smoothly through that track. Big note here. You want to pounce an anti-static powder tool before you remove the release paper from the foam tape. Otherwise, you will make your foam tape be not sticky. After I removed all the release paper from the foam tape, I added that to the front of my card. And then I decided that I needed to have an extra grassy hill, so I die cut another piece of black cardstock with the same grass and cloud edger dies. I did add a little bit of white ink along the top of the front grassy hill, just so there would be some differentiation between the front hill and the back hill. I adhered the pumpkins and the other two bees using liquid glue, and I used my scissors to trim off the top of the witch hat from the bee who's in front of the moon, so that it wouldn't hang off the edge of my card. And to finish it up, I added a little bit of sparkle to the wings with my Wink of Stella glitter pen. And that's it. That finishes up my card for today. Don't forget to click on the link in the description box below to head on over to Marla's channel to see what she did for her interactive card. Thank you so much for joining me. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you've not yet subscribed, I'd love it if you would. And don't forget to ring the bell so you're notified every time a new video is posted. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.